Ma'am, step out of the vehicle, now.
Officer, this is my car. I live here. You can
I
check
said
my
step out.
ID.
You're being detained for a stolen vehicle.
Wait, what are you doing? This is my car.
Hands where I can see them. Step out now.
Officer, please, this is a misunderstanding. I'm a federal...
The dashcam footage captured every second of the 35 minutes that would become the most expensive traffic stop in the state's history. It was 2:15 p.m. when Alicia Jensen, a woman who had spent 30 years interpreting the Constitution, found herself staring down the barrel of it in her own driveway. Fresh from a morning presiding over a complex civil rights case, she was still in her professional blazer when the flashing lights behind her turned a quiet suburban afternoon into a high-stakes legal nightmare. She didn't know it yet, but the man approaching her car with his hand on his weapon was about to make $1 million mistake that would rewrite both of their lives forever. But before we show you the moment the chief of police saw the footage, I have to ask, have you ever witnessed something like this happening in your community? Type yes in the comments if you have. And if you believe no one is above the law, hit that subscribe button right now to see how this $1 million mistake ended a career. The afternoon sun hung low over the manicured lawns of Oak Ridge Estates, casting long amber shadows that turned the suburban quiet into a cinematic gold. For Alicia Jensen, this light usually signaled the transition from the heavy weight of the federal bench to the sanctuary of her home. At 51, she had reached the pinnacle of a career built on the meticulous dissection of the law, graduating from Harvard with honors and serving decades as both a prosecutor and a private litigator. Just hours ago, she had been draped in black robes, presiding over a high-stakes civil rights case where the arguments centered on the sanctity of the Fourth Amendment. She was a woman who understood the mechanical precision of justice better than almost anyone in the state. Yet as she turned her black Mercedes sedan into her driveway, the irony of her day was about to become a living nightmare. The quiet click of her indicator was met with the sudden, jarring flash of red and blue in her rearview mirror. Alicia felt a flicker of confusion rather than fear. She was a respected member of this community and assumed the officer behind her might simply be seeking information about a neighbor. She gathered her briefcase, her mind already drifting toward a quiet evening with her family, but the sound of a patrol car door slamming with unnecessary force snapped her back to the present. As Officer Hollis Condon approached her, his hand wasn't resting casually on his belt, it was gripped firmly on his service weapon. Through the driver's side window, Alicia didn't see a public servant performing a routine check. She saw a man whose jaw was set in a hard line of predetermined guilt. Before she could offer a greeting, Condon's voice cut through the golden hour stillness like a blade, demanding her license and registration with a bark that bypassed professional courtesy entirely. When Alicia calmly asked why she was being stopped on her own property, Condon's response was a textbook escalation. He claimed her vehicle matched the description of a stolen car reported in the area, a fabrication that ignored the high-end child seat in the back and the professional documents scattered on the passenger side. Alicia reached for her judicial ID, but Condon didn't want to see a badge, he wanted a suspect. The metallic click of a car door slamming echoed through the suburban silence, a sound that usually signaled a neighbor returning home, but now felt like the first note of a funeral dirge for a career. Officer Hollis Condon didn't just walk toward the Mercedes, he stalked it, his boots striking the asphalt with a rhythmic, aggressive intent that Alicia Jensen recognized from 1,000 hours of testimony. She remained in her seat, her hands visible on the steering wheel, her breathing measured. In her courtroom, she was the final word on the law, but here, under the encroaching shadows of the golden hour, she was simply a target. When Condon reached the window, he didn't offer the professional courtesy of a greeting. Instead, he barked a demand for her license and registration, his voice thick with a hostility that bypassed inquiry and went straight to accusation. Alicia's response was a calm, clinical question regarding the reason for the stop on her own property. It was a reasonable inquiry, but in Condon's world, reason was a challenge to his authority. He leaned in, his shadow eclipsing the light in the cabin, and claimed her vehicle matched the description of a black Mercedes stolen earlier today. It was a clumsy fabrication, a textbook example of racial profiling that ignored the high-end child seat in the back and the professional documents scattered on the passenger side. As Alicia reached for her briefcase to retrieve her judicial ID, Condon's hand moved to his holster. The air between them electrified. He ordered her out of the vehicle, his volume rising as he accused her of being evasive. Alicia moved with a deliberate slowness, her years of experience in the legal system teaching her that in this moment, compliance was her only shield against a physical escalation. She stepped onto her driveway, her heels clicking on the stone, and once again identified herself as a federal judge. She pointed to the white colonial house just steps away, offering to provide her credentials, but Condon was no longer listening to facts. He saw only a suspect to be subdued. Before she could finish her sentence, Condon spun her around. The cold, biting pressure of steel ratcheted shut around her wrists. The very hands that signed federal warrants were now bound in the back of a patrol car, while the man who put them there had no idea he had just signed the end of his own professional life. The high-pitched whine of the patrol car's siren had long since cut out, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence that was broken only by the distant sound of a neighbor's lawnmower. From the back of the cruiser, the world Alicia Jensen had inhabited for 3 years looked distorted through the reinforced glass and heavy wire mesh. She could see her own front door, the wreath she had hung just last week, the potted ferns on the porch, yet it felt 1,000 miles away. The steel of the handcuffs bit into her skin with every slight movement, a cold reminder that in the eyes of Officer Hollis Condon, her 30 years of legal brilliance were invisible. The commotion had not been unnoticed. Across the street, Eleanor Davis stood frozen by her garden, the hose in her hand forgotten as water pooled around her feet. She had watched Alicia move in, watched her children visit, and knew exactly what her neighbor did for a living. Seeing a federal judge being handled like a violent felon in daylight was a sight that defied the logic of their quiet cul-de-sac. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She pulled out her phone, the screen capturing the jagged, high-contrast tension of the scene in 4K resolution. Nearby, James Mitchell, out for his afternoon walk, stepped toward the driveway with his hands raised in a gesture of peace. He called out to Condon, his voice steady but urgent, explaining that he knew this woman and that she was a member of the federal bench. Condon didn't even turn his head. His jaw remained locked in a position of stubborn defiance, his ego now a barrier that no amount of facts could penetrate. He barked at James to step back, threatening him with an obstruction charge if he didn't mind his own business. It was a display of pure, unchecked power, a man so committed to his initial mistake that he was willing to bulldoze the testimony of an entire neighborhood to protect it. Alicia watched it all from her caged vantage point, her controlled anger sharpening into a cold, judicial focus. She knew then that this wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. It was a declaration of war against the very rights she had sworn to protect. The flashing lights of 2 additional patrol cars splashed against the white columns of Alicia's home, turning the suburban sanctuary into a chaotic crime scene. Officer Hollis Condon stood by the driver's side of his cruiser, his radio chatter filled with the confident jargon of a man who believed he had just intercepted a high-level fugitive. He reported that he had a suspect in custody for vehicle theft who was now attempting an elaborate ruse by claiming to be a federal judge. To Condon, the complexity of Alicia's identity was merely a layer of deception, a desperate play by a criminal who knew the game was up. He ignored the red marks deepening on Alicia's wrists and the steady, silent gaze she held through the window, a gaze that was cataloging every procedural error he made. The arrival of Officer Sarah Martinez changed the molecular weight of the encounter. A 12-year veteran with a reputation for meticulousness didn't share Condon's tunnel vision. She stepped into the driveway and immediately felt the dissonance of the scene. The high-end SUV, the professional attire of the woman in the back seat, and the frantic, inconsistent briefing Condon was providing. When Condon pointed to the stolen Mercedes, Martinez asked for the specific dispatch details of the report. Condon's response was evasive, his narrative beginning to fray under the pressure of actual scrutiny. Martinez walked to the rear of the patrol car. As the window rolled down, the frantic energy of the driveway seemed to stop at the glass. Alicia Jensen didn't plead. She spoke with the cold, resonant clarity of the bench. She repeated her name and her position, her voice a sharp contrast to Condon's shouting. Martinez looked at the woman, then at the neighbors who were now offering video evidence and desperate character references. The realization hit Martinez like a physical blow. They weren't holding a car thief, they were holding a constitutional nightmare in handcuffs. She didn't wait for Condon's permission. She radioed dispatch with a priority request to verify the credentials of a sitting federal judge, her voice tight with the sudden knowledge that their department was standing on the edge of a precipice. The industrial hum of the precinct intake office provided a sterile backdrop for Officer Hollis Condon as he sat before his terminal, his fingers flying across the keys with the frantic energy of a man trying to outrun the truth. He was drafting a masterpiece of administrative fiction, a sanitized incident report that painted the afternoon's events as a textbook case of proactive policing. In Condon's written narrative, Alicia Jensen was no longer a victim of a constitutional violation. She was a highly evasive suspect who had matched a vague vehicle theft description and refused to comply with lawful orders. He carefully omitted the part where he ignored her federal credentials, and he completely erased the chorus of neighbors who had stood on their own lawns to vouch for her identity. He believed that as long as his paperwork was in order, the reality of the driveway would simply fade away. But the digital age offered no such shadows to hide in. While Condon was busy polishing his lies, Sergeant David Morrison was already in the quiet of the watch commander's office, leaning into the blue light of his laptop screen. Morrison had spent 20 years reading between the lines of standard reports, and the discrepancies in Condon's filing were screaming for attention. The logic was fundamentally broken. Why would a car thief drive directly into a private driveway and calmly wait for the police? Morrison pulled the raw dashcam footage, and as the 4K video flickered to life, the sergeant felt a cold knot of dread tighten in his chest. He didn't see an officer following protocol. He saw a career-ending disaster caught in high definition. He watched Condon's aggression, heard Alicia's calm judicial poise, and saw the moment a routine stop became a million-dollar liability. By the time the sun had fully set, Morrison wasn't thinking about a misunderstanding. He was preparing to walk the footage into the chief's office. The courtroom was silent, a stark contrast to the chaotic driveway where the nightmare had begun 18 months earlier. Alicia Jensen sat at the plaintiff's table, her posture as regal and unwavering as it had been on the day she was forced into the back of a patrol car. Across the aisle, Hollis Condon looked smaller, the aggressive bravado that had defined his career replaced by the hollow stare of a man who realized his protected status had finally expired. The jury had spent only 4 hours deliberating, but the weight of their decision felt like it had been decades in the making. When the foreperson stood to read the verdict, the air in the room seemed to thin. The judgment was a thunderclap, a $1 million reward for damages, and a stinging rebuke of the department's oversight. But for Alicia, the victory wasn't found in the 7-figure settlement. It was in the mandatory court-ordered reforms that would dismantle the systemic bias Condon had weaponized. The $1 million mistake had become a catalyst for a total overhaul of the force, ensuring that no other citizen would have their rights stripped away in their own driveway. As the gavel fell for the final time, Condon was escorted out, his badge already a relic of a discredited past. Alicia walked out of the courthouse and into the late afternoon sun, the light hitting the stone steps with the same golden hue as that Tuesday in Oak Ridge Estates. She had spent her life serving the law, and in the end, the law served her. She used the settlement to establish a foundation dedicated to civil rights, turning a moment of profound humiliation into a legacy of protection. Sometimes justice takes time, and sometimes it arrives with a price tag that a city can never forget. But when it finally lands, it has the power to change everything. Alicia Jensen had gone from a suspect in a driveway to a guardian of the community, proving for all time that while an ego can start a fight, the truth always has the final word. While this story is based on detailed accounts and documented events, specific details or dialogue may vary across different reports. This video is for educational and documentary purposes only. Like and subscribe for more content of Law & Order Unfiltered.